You and the land are one. Drink.
I'm wasting away. And I cannot die. And I cannot live.
Drink from the chalice and you will be reborn and the land with you.
You and the land are one. Drink. So, we mentioned in part 2 that the Arthurian stories were nostalgic in Chaucer's time, and that many people added new parts to the main story, or added additional stories about the knights, to the point where it became hard to see what little truth there might have been to begin with, although I'm not sure if anyone really cared for the truth anyway.
Which is the greatest quality of knighthood? Courage, compassion, loyalty, humility? What do you say, Vernon?
The greatest. Well, they blend. Like the metals we mix to make a good sword.
No poetry, just a straight answer. Which is it?
All right, then. Truth. That's it. Yes, it must be truth. Above all. When a man lies, he murders some part of the world. You should know that.
So the Arthurian legend became so mythologized that the land itself had become an Arcadia, some kind of pre-lapsarian paradise, or at least one that is rediscovered after sipping from the Grail. A land needs a good and just king, a fair ruler, and if possible, more than just a good leader, but preferably a monarch with some sense of divine purpose to unite the people. Now, I've always been a romantic, yet I've had to lower my expectations massively on what sort of leader my country is likely to have. In fact, lately both Brexiters and Remainers, or even neutrals if that even exists, have perhaps dreamt of the Queen involving herself politically to sort out the whole mess of Brexit. I actually think that if she did just pick a side or a solution to the problem, most people would probably just accept it, even if that decision wasn't even what they wanted. Now, the Arthurian legends have been revived and reimagined many, many times through history. In 1590, the poet Edmund Spenser published the first parts of his epic poem The Fairy Queen, which actually mythologizes his own queen, Queen Elizabeth, putting her in the setting of this Arthurian Arcadia. Monarchs and leaders want to have their own legacy. Remember in Henry V, old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day, and so on.
The wars are over! One land, one king! Peace! Oh! Stand back! Be silent! Be still! That's it. And look upon this moment. Savor it. Rejoice with great gladness. Great gladness. Remember it always, for you are joined by it. You are one under the stars. Remember it well, then, this night, this great victory, so that in the years ahead, you can say, I was there, that night with Arthur, the king. For it is the doom of men that they forget.
Now, we might be getting a bit away from nostalgia. I'm currently away from home, so I don't have my Chambers etymological dictionary at hand. But using Google, I can see that nostalgia actually means homesickness. So there's a kind of longing to return to some old memory, some old place in time where we felt safe, perhaps, and less troubled. Now, I said in part one how people generally don't know what it was like in World War II. And what I meant was that most people don't remember. Of course, there are some people who were either children or young adults, but they are the minority now. Times were hard, but even in hard times, and even more so if you were still in your formative years, you can look back with happy memories. I guess the examples of nostalgia mentioned in part 2 are different to the example I mentioned in part 1, but the rhetoric is being used in a similar way, especially in the Henry V example. Many Brexit supporters seem to want to go back to how things were, like eating fish and chips in newspaper or whatever. That's nostalgia. Now, going back to Spenser's The Fairy Queen, we have here a literary example of creating a kind of new legend, albeit based on old ones. In the poem, the Tudor lineage can be connected all the way back to King Arthur. The poem is strongly allegorical, yet with this Spenser is able to immortalise his queen in sublime verse. And so we go back to modern day, and I can't say Theresa May left much of a legacy behind. She can perhaps one day be known as the Prime Minister who at least asked for extensions to the Brexit date, which might in future be seen as a good thing, who knows. Now, in the last few days, Boris Johnson, the new Prime Minister, has used a lofty speech to not so much evoke past glories or nostalgia, but to make it sound like he's going to write himself into the history books as the greatest Prime Minister of all time, or something like that. He certainly is ambitious. So the rhetoric lately for Brexit is of not so much the past glories, but how amazing everything will be in the future, like Trump's Make America Great Again winning slogan. I think listening to the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he's already started his general election campaign. I wouldn't be surprised if we had a similar slogan like Make Britain Great Again. I'm all for positivity, but the general public hasn't been given much of a clear outline as to how this new Arcadia will look or function. It's all a bit of a fantasy portrait to me, but a bit too good to be true. Now, on his Brexit Party rallies, Nigel Farage has said that Britain will have its very own Independence Day when it leaves the EU. Yay! I know patriotic Brits like to sing that Britons never, never, never will be slaves. So is this Farage saying that we have been slaves for the last few decades, or that perhaps we're just slowly becoming slaves and we need to release ourselves now before it's too late? I don't know. But the Independence Day part is interesting. He is very much linked to the US, and here's another likeness. But Britain is Britain. America is America. I don't know why we need to be more like America. I'm not sure how that's being more patriotic. England's about 20 miles away from France. Some people drive 20 miles just to go shopping. In America, it's about 3,500 miles away, so I don't know. Anyway, now in early American literature, there were attempts to find new styles of writing that were independent from the popular literature from across the pond. Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle is interesting as an example of the creating of a new country and a new mythology. But Washington Irving shows just how difficult that is within his own story, as the old image of King George III on the sign of the inn is simply replaced with another ruling George Washington. It kind of says that though everything has changed, in some ways things haven't changed. There are just new flags and new allegiances formed, but still many of the same problems exist. But there is a new sense of optimism and pride. So I see the rhetoric of Brexit having turned from the persuasive use of nostalgia to gather support to what is now the projecting of that nostalgia into the future and saying all will be great and you just have to believe. The ones who are delivering Brexit will somehow be immortalised themselves and probably dream of having statues erected in their honour and songs will be sung and so on. This is where I see again the allusions to the Henry V speech. I just hope for a good future. Goodbye.
I was not born to live a man's life, but to be the stuff of future memory. The fellowship was a brief beginning, a fair time that cannot be forgotten. And because it will not be forgotten, that fair time may come again.